What's up, guys? It's been a minute, but if we got to this point together, it means that you made it through Christmas and we're all here. You know, as you kind of reflect on the year and the things that have happened, YouTube is really great with keeping you up to date on what's going on with your YouTube channel. And I got one of those YouTube creator year-end summaries. And I just have to, really say thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the people that have commented, whether it be good or bad. Thank you for everybody who's subscribed, clicked the notification bell, everybody who's viewed, shared, supported, provided information down at the bottom, you know, in the comments, maybe even hipping me to some new things. That's been a regular occurrence, and I'm so appreciative of you guys. I got some stats here I want to run by you guys. More than 2.3 million watched minutes over this year. 500K plus views, 3,000 comments, 13,000 subs, and I'm just blown away. You know, it's really mind-blowing to see, like, where you started and where you are now, you know, and filming everything up from my iPhone and just, you know, being honest and I guess in as bare bones as possible. I'm really appreciative in it, and it kind of gives, you know, somebody motivation. You know, during this year, I had a heavy surgery at the beginning of the year, and I kind of made a stand to do these YouTube videos for fun and not put so much pressure on myself. And that's been the most inspiring thing to me, you know. There's been like a weight lifted, and it's allowed me to just do these at my own leisure and when I'm, you know, when I'm feeling it, and you guys are still there, and that says so much, and it's something that I appreciate. Last month I did an interview with Mark Hopkins, great guy, great singer-songwriter who sits down with different players and just kind of gives you a little behind the scenes into their life, and we spoke at length about the kind of bare bones approach to my YouTube channel, and it really resonated with me because, you know, he picked up on the fact that there's no big camera work, and it's not theatrical, and what you see is what you get, and I've always lived that way. And again, for you guys to still support, nothing flashy, nothing crazy. It's been a really mind-blowing and honored. And I really appreciate you guys. I honestly do. And I think maybe sometimes as you know, the YouTube guys, we don't say thanks enough because we don't get to see everybody at a one-on-one, you know, situation. But I am really thankful, and you know, I'm humbled that, you know, maybe 13,000 people want to tune in on a weekly basis to see what I have to say. So it just really means a lot, and it's a big motivating factor coming into the new year. Also, this video right here, the SRV Pedalboard video, they let you know that that's your most viewed, most watched video, most interaction. And that's really cool because with Stevie being such a stripped down rig, there is still some mystique as to what he's doing with the tube screamer and the wah, how he was using it together, what he was using it for, and what were the advantages and disadvantages. And I had never seen kind of like an in-depth approach to checking it out. So that's what inspired me to do that video at that time. And even if you go and watch that video, not that I need to plug it, but I'll put the link up here. If you go and check that video, it's as basic as it can be as far as techie. But in the beginning of the video, there's a lot of insight as to what was really going on there. Like some factors that people don't really think about when they think about Stevie's rig, Stevie's setup, and how he was using it, you know, how he was using it to his advantage. It's a little chatty, but it kind of, if you understand that part first, then all of the pedalboard stuff, you know, kind of makes a little bit of sense coming from me. So maybe half and half, but you know, some of that stuff kind of becomes clearer, and you kind of get an idea of what was really happening there. I obviously, you know, if anybody who knows me, I'm a huge fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix, and those are two very popular topics on this channel. And also old guitars, that's a big popular topic, and fuzz. These are all things that I'm passionate about, so all I'm doing is sharing it with you guys. And sometimes, you know, people will say, oh, another SRV video or another SRV clone. You know, to the guys that say those things, you have to understand, like, that's a compliment, actually. So you may think you're sending a dig somebody's way, but if you're saying that somebody playing guitar reminds you of potentially one of the greatest guitar players that ever lived. It's a compliment. So thanks to the haters, thanks for the supporters. It's all good, baby. I figured with this video as a thank you to you guys and you SRV fans, I was going to talk about some tips, some SRV tone tips that have worked for me that some people may overlook as important or beneficial when striving for the SRV tone. Now, some of these things I may talked about before, some of the things I may mentioned before, but it's really easy to go on the internet, or it's really easy to kind of get taken over by all that stuff, you know, and reading these taglines and, you know, it's got to be a Dumble, or it's got to be this, or I need clean glassy tone, or I got to have this and I have to have that. There's a lot of things that you can do just with guitar setup and kind of getting that to transfer well into the amplifier setup. And you're, you know, as far as tone goes and setup goes, you're 90% of the way there. The rest is, as Miles would say, the MF are behind the wheel, you know? So I'm going to talk about a few things, and, you know, maybe you guys can apply this, but, man, I love talking about Stevie, and, you know, sometimes I toy with the idea of just making a channel devoted to talking about SRV, but there's already people out there that do that, and, well, you know. So before we get into the guitar, which was my first thing to talk about, let's talk about the guy, Stevie. Enormous hands, enormous hand strength, but you can't overlook the spirit, okay? That's the one thing that it's fun to do this, and it's fun to try to replicate and shoot for some of those tones and some of those licks and be able to put them all in this, you know, this package that you can present, all full well knowing that you're hopefully just trying to pay homage to a guy that you respect and admire so much. Stevie was a force of nature, and he was a powerhouse, and I think he had a gift, and he shared his gift with us, which was amazing. Much like Jimi Hendrix and Albert Collins and Albert King, all of these guys that just had this funkiness to them that you just could not replicate. And that's something that you can't go on eBay and buy, and you can't go on the forum and you know, get some tips on how to be a badass. It just happens, you know. So first, I just want to make, you know, I want to say this first is, let's not overlook the fact that Stevie Ray Vaughan was one of the greatest guitar players, and he was one of the greatest musicians because of his soul, his heart, and the emotion he put into the music. I just want to make that clear first. There'll never be another one, and that's just the sad truth. You know, we were lucky to get his music and his message shared with us, and he went on somewhere else. So let's talk about the guitar first, which I think is probably the most important thing. I necessarily don't think that the amp is the end-all be-all of that SRV tone stuff. I really feel like it's, you know, what's making the sound, the guitar. Your hands, your mechanics on the neck, your right hand, your left hand correlation, and the guitar setup itself. And the first thing I want to talk about is string height. Not necessarily string gauge, guys. I know other guys will argue the point, you know, till they're blue in the face, that it's got to be a 58 and it's got to be a 13, it's got to be a 12. I think that, you know, after you get to like 52 or maybe a 54 on the low E, I don't necessarily think you're really, everything is splitting hairs at this point, you know. I think that string height and the room of the string under the neck, under the pickups, has a lot to do with the resonance, the open, airy sound, that ability to have that clear, heavy sounding note. You know, a note that rings, or an open string that rings free and clear. That's a lot of what I hear going on with Stevie's playing, especially. And over time, I've got my action to where it's up pretty high, maybe like 95 thousandths, 100 thousandths. That's fairly tall. I know guys that have it up even more, and, you know, props to them. But as far as one of the factors there, I really feel that's detrimental, because it does a little something different when you're playing the string. You know, it gives you a little more roundness, and like I said, it kind of like an open, almost a hollow feeling when you're playing some of those out there. It's really percussive too. Now, when you get those strings up there, most guys would say, okay, my strings are higher, so I got to bring my pickups higher to get closer to the strings. With Stevie stuff especially, I don't necessarily think that was the case. all of the videos and the pictures I've watched and all the research I've done, his pickups weren't set crazy high. Obviously, you know, you want to go a little higher on the treble side of things because of the thinner string gauge. But for the most part, the pickups were set quite low. I do believe he did have his bridge pickup up a little higher. And that's also just a common thing with Fenders, because if you play old Strats, you know that it was kind of backwards from the beginning, where they put the weakest pickup back here. So, you know, I do see the bridge pickup up a lot, and, you know, hence the guy was playing. He's playing a lot of that Albert King stuff. You want that bridge pickup to be powerful, but I think you also want it to have some girth and be big. So getting it too close will kind of take away some of that, I don't want to say low end, but will sometimes take away some of the width from the pickup. So, you know, mess around with getting the pickups a little lower. Mess around with setting them. You wanted to balance them, right? So you want all pickups to kind of have the same volume output, but how you tweak them from side to side in little increments can really, you know, can really make your guitar sound like yourself. That's one of the other factors, is you can end up finding your own tone in there, you know, especially if you're an in-between position guy, like on the 2 and 4s, then you would maybe bring that middle pickup out a little stronger, so that becomes dominant when you blend those two pickup positions. As I had mentioned, you know, the strings being higher, you know, you're going to get this kind of natural percussive resonance. The guitar is going to be a little livelier and vibrate in a way. And another one of those factors that I think is beneficial when you're searching for the SRV stuff is having that guitar kind of vibrate, you know, and having it kind of be resonant when you're playing it. Some of the things I like to do as far as setup wise is deck the bridge to the body, because I think you have, you know, if you have enough tension on it, you're kind of getting a direct transfer from what's going on here to what's going on there. There's no floating bridge there, floating trem to kind of let those notes vibrate into the atmosphere. You're getting a direct correlation. To me, there's some luthiers and some setup guys that may say I'm absolutely wrong, and that's fine. But I know, like, when I play something, I can feel it here, which is great. And then also for the resonance factor, I'll use, I like to use the raw vintage tremolo springs. Now, I don't think these springs were designed for SRV Tone, but what I'm saying is, to get that kind of feel that I wanted for the guitar, where it's kind of, you know, it rumbles on its own when you play a note and it kind of sustains a little better, I went with these raw vintage tremolo springs. I've spoken about them in other videos, and I think they're really, really great. They do a really, really nice job of making the guitar speak, even unplugged. Sounds loud. And then, you know, I think just having the guitar set up properly, sometimes it's not just best to raise your string height, lower your pickups, and say, this is it, I'm done, because sometimes you won't be happy with the results. Other times it may be inspiring, and that's great. But, you know, have a good setup on the guitar. You got to think Stevie was working with Rene Martinez, and he was able to have those guitars set up on a nightly basis if something was wrong. So those are some things as far as the guitar. That is essentially the engine of the Tone machine. So, you know, as far as electronics, I mean, you know, Stevie wasn't playing vintage Stratocaster pickups. He was just playing Stratocaster pickups from that era. You know, I remember getting into an online argument with somebody one time saying, you need, Jimi Hendrix only played vintage Celestians. Well, they weren't vintage at the time. They were just what was available. And just like that, I mean, Stevie's guitar was a 63, and you're talking about 1983. So the guitar was 20 years old, but, you know, he was just playing the pickups that were in the guitar. Usually in the, you know, 5.5 to 6.0 K range. That's just the resistance reading of the pickup. That really means nothing. Obviously, if you have a little more resistance, if you have a 7K pickup, it's going to be a little hotter due to the way it's wound. But there's a lot of things like capacitance and inductance that come into factors when you're talking about pickups, and that's for a whole nother episode, for a whole nother expert, not for me. But, you know, I like all these pickups here are in the mid 5s, and that would be blasphemy for you know, new pickups from this era. But that's really all that Stevie had going on. He was just playing the pickups for that guitar. It wasn't necessarily he wasn't chasing newly designed pickups. And I know that in the guitar they called Main, they swapped out some pickups at one point, and they kind of did this back and forth thing with pickups because things weren't right. And I think just, his ear was so tuned to what the old pickups did, and you set the guitar up with that. That's just what the guitar had. So if you're searching for pickups, just basically, I guess, to put it in a nutshell, you want to find something that's mid-5s to 6K, nothing really more than that. And just like I said, spend time setting them up, get that string height up, and yeah, man, try decking the trem to the body too. That'll do it. So as we move away from the guitar, cables. You want to get a cable that, sometimes these new cables can be really great, but as Stevie once said to his tech, I think the cable is passing too much electricity. It's more capacitance and resistance. And I think that sometimes we can spend crazy amounts of money on guitar cables when essentially, the coily cables seem to load the signal just right, but they load it just right for a certain reason. The amp, these guys that we look up to and the guys that we admire and guys whose tone we try to hunt out, none of those guys played quiet. You have to factor that in. Hendrix, multiple stacks. Stevie with a wall of amps on stage. Albert Collins with a quad reverb on 10. None of those guys played quietly. When you play at a volume like that, you introduce a natural low end and natural gain from the amplifier. This is one of the hardest things that people have a hard time accepting. Hey, what's a good amp that I can play in my bedroom for SRV Tone? You can simulate some of that stuff, but to try to move the amount of air and volume and low end and rumble and boom and 3D characteristic an amp does when it's really, really turned up, it's impossible. It's truly impossible to try to shove all of that into a Princeton reverb on 2, wondering why it doesn't sound like SRV because you set the amp up like somebody told you to on the internet. It doesn't work that way. You have to think about the amount of texture the amp has once the tubes in a 45 watt amp are now heating up properly and allowing that amp to work the way it's supposed to. Not necessarily saying that it's got to be a Fender amp, or it has to have some magic tubes, but I think somewhere along the lines of a 35 watt amp, to 75 and even 100 watt, you got to get the volume up and you have to get the amp to start working comfortably. My thinking behind it is, if you had a super reverb and you were only allowed to get it on 2 in your bedroom because you didn't want to wake the neighbors up, that amp's struggling to give you tone. And if you're trying to play with soul, you're trying to dig in, you're trying to express those notes and squeeze them out for everything they're worth, you're not going to do it with an amp on 2. So one of the hardest things to accept is getting an amplifier up there. And once you do, and once that becomes, okay, this doesn't change anymore, I'm playing my Pro Reverb or my Super Reverb, the volume is on 7 all the time, you'll really start seeing where the magic is. All of a sudden, all those rhythm tones where they're kind of crunchy and like the stuff like the doing it, they start doing their own thing because you're not forcing it. You're not using a pedal to get it to crunch up that way. You're just using the natural gain from the amp. And if you see some of those settings with Stevie, the bass isn't really up. This goes back to where I said having the volume up that high introduces a natural low end. Some of the things, if you had like a super reverb style amp, I would really say goose the treble because you can hear a lot of treble. And I think that in my brain, those guys were using it for clarity. So, I would really goose the treble and the mids if your amp has a mid control. Guitar is a naturally mid-range instrument, but I think look at it as the mids all of a sudden becomes sometimes the mids can become your push to get you out in the front, and that's kind of what you want. So me, like typically, and this is only for me, but I'll usually, if I had a super reverb, I'll put the super about 7 to 8, treble at 9, mids at 8, and bass maybe at 2.5 to 3. Reverb obviously adjust to taste, but that's because I have the amp pushing. The amp is pushing all of the air. It's creating natural distortion, and that's how I don't even play with pedals when it comes to that. When I'm plugging into the Super like that, I'll just play just the amp because you're getting all the overdrive you want. And it sounds different. You know, it sounds more natural and organic, and it sounds like that's how it wants to run. So it may be tough on the ears and it may be tough on the neighbors, but those are some of the amp must-haves. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the truth. You know, once you get to a point where you're content with the amp and how it works, that's when I think that you should try to alter speakers. That's when I think that you should try to alter tubes, because you've already found something that you can work with. You already found a sound and a setting that seems to work. And now you can really start to split the fine hairs and say, man, I wonder if I had a lower gain preamp tube in that position, how it would act. Would it be less muddy? Would it change this? Would it change that? Or, you know, I wonder if a high wattage speaker would keep the bass a little tighter in this situation. I wouldn't necessarily buy an amp to mod it. I would buy an amp to see if it's something that can fit in your wheelhouse, see if it's something you can bond with, and then start. Like say, all right, well, factory speakers are 35 watts each at 4 of them. Maybe if I tried a 50 watt speaker, or if I tried a 75 watt speaker or a 100 watt speaker, you try 4 of those. Now you're dealing with a high wattage speaker, high powered speaker. It's going to tighten up the bass, and it's not going to fold like the amp did before. And I use fold as a term meaning break up or kind of like mush onto itself, you know. So these are all factors that I would look into after I found my desired tone with the amp I like. Because you can tweak yourself out of a good amp, and you can tweak yourself into magic. There's a really fine line there, you know. You just got to watch how you walk it. So that's, you know, as far as the gear, you know, really, you don't need a tube screamer. That's not the essence of SRV Tone. And if you reference the video that I just talked about earlier, all we're really doing there is using the tube screamer to push the front end of the amp when he was going into those solos. And that's truly what was happening. He wasn't using it as an essential, I need this for my rig, you know. A lot of the early stuff was just Stevie playing with 2 cranked amps and a wah-wah that they would plug in and out in between songs. So that just goes to show you right there how simple his setup actually was. And again, using the tube screamer to just push stuff out front when he was going for a solo or a fill-in riff. His right hand was really important. The way he would kind of use it as another drum, and he would hit heavy on one note but light on the other. There's a lot of that back and forth going on, and I think that's, you know, Stevie would snap a lot of notes. There's a lot of snapping going on. There's a lot of playing with the finger, the meat of the fingers. He took direction from guys like Albert Collins, guys like Albert King, majorly. I don't have a pick in my hand. Sorry, guys. So study the right hand, and I spent a lot of time watching his right hand, because you have things like... You have things like that. You know, there's a certain essence where he's hitting harder on the notes that he wants to jump out, and like I said, he played a lot with that. And there's notes that pop out there, you know, and I think it's when he's hitting it harder or when he's hitting it delicately. I focus on a lot of what he's doing, and I focus about his hybrid technique that nobody really tries to play with, but he always had fingers dangling under those strings. You know, all those little things, just making certain just little points jump out. I really feel like that's effective when chasing his stuff. And you know, lastly, I can't not speak about this. Do I think it's important. It can be in a way. This can make the note. If you hold the pick this way, right? Normally we're taught you hold the pointed end out. Look at it as this way. Look at it as you only have this much surface to hit the string, right? And I think if you have that much surface to hit the string, it takes a little while to get accustomed to it, but it gives you a little more insurance and it gives you that much more area to hit the string, and you can also hit it a little harder. So that's my take on the holding the pick, or the pick position. And again, as a year in review, man, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. Hopefully these SRV Tone tips, you can try some of them. This is only from my experience. This is not the Bible, and this is not me telling you guys what needs to happen. These are some of the things that in my journey I've found to help me with the SRV Tone. And I've just learned how to become accustomed to it, because it's more good than bad, and it's become so beneficial to kind of sounding unique and making things work for you and for your playing. You guys have really lit me up, and you know, I'm just really inspired, and I'm really appreciative. So thank you so much for a great 2021. Regardless of what's going on in the world, we got each other right on here. And I got something cool coming, you know, in the next year. I want to do some cool stuff. First video is going to be about this. This is super cool. I can't wait to speak about this and talk about this. This was a really, really cool project that I took on with a buddy of mine, and I am over the moon about it. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be talking about this and sitting down with a builder who has become a great friend and a fellow tone nerd and knows exactly what he's doing, and I approve of this. So you guys, be well to each other, man. Have a safe new year, and you know, just be good to each other. And again, just know that whatever's going on, I really appreciate all the support and you guys hanging in with me, and you guys being there, and you guys checking out the channel. So mess with some SRV, mess with some guitar, mess with some tone, amps, strings, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, make sure you're giving us your voice, because that's what we want to hear. We all want to be individuals. We can quote our sources, we can quote the legends that inspired us, but we always want to be able to say what's on our own minds. We'll talk soon, guys. I'll see you next year. Peace.
Thank you.